Hello, Physionic Podcast. Today I've got a slightly different episode. I'm not really going to be talking to you about something, well, I am going to be talking to you about something that I know, but I'm more curious about your perspective on something. This question was spurred on by a comment that was put under one of the YouTube videos that I released, talking about kind of evolutionary changes. And I'm genuinely curious if you think that the human evolution from this point on is going to change in terms of course, it's going to change because that's essentially what evolution is, a change from one state to another state, usually in some sort of betterment of that state. But I'm more intrigued in if you think that we are going to regress. So we're not going to evolve, but we are going to devolve because of the habits that we've been using. And not only that, but if we're going to see a speeding up of that devolvation, devolution, evolution, devolution. Okay, I'll call it devolution. So a speeding up of that devolution. So if you think of things like obesity, for example, or just being overweight, I think in the United States, I think the statistics are something like almost 2/3 of individuals in the United States are either overweight or obese. And I released something on Instagram talking about how worldwide, I think the proportion is going to increase. It's right now 25% of individuals worldwide, of course that's taking into consideration the United States, are either overweight or obese. And in the next 8 years, I think it was 8 years, no, 6 years, 6 years, so even sooner, 35% of the world population is going to be either overweight or obese, which is staggering to think about, because that means that in our lifetime, within the next few decades, if this keeps going, I just like shudder to think about a world in which the majority of the world population, that's already happening in the United States, but in the world population, we see more people that are at least overweight. And of course, with that, you're going to see increases in obesity. So more people are going to be shifting from overweight to obese that are overweight right now. You're going to start seeing that shift, but also just the number of people that are overweight. You're going to have a majority of individuals who are overweight. That's crazy. That's insane. We're in 6 years, we're only going to be 15% away from that reality of having 50 to 51% of individuals overweight or obese. So think about the epigenetic changes that of course occurs. I've talked about that before, that you do see changes. And this is just one example. So, of course, think about it outside of that context as well. Don't necessarily just pigeonhole yourself to this context of, overweight or obese. I'm just kind of pinpointing this particular point because I do think that as we consume more and we keep seeming to consume more, our caloric intake continues to rise as we have more and more hyper palatable foods and more processed foods, of course, as well. Are we going to see not an evolution of humankind, but are we going to start seeing a devolution of humankind? And I think that's a really interesting question because so far, over hundreds of thousands of years, as we've kind of evolved from kind of hunter-gatherers, foragers to agriculture and whatnot, we've seen these great increases, these great abilities by the human body. So, of course, the average height, for example, has increased substantially since those days. And if you're an anthropologist, I don't know, I completely made up a word. But if you study that stuff and I'm wrong about that, please feel free to correct me. But as far as I'm aware, we've seen increases in height, for example, and I'd imagine, and of course I know for a fact we've definitely seen increases in our lifespan, and of course our health span as well. So of course we've gone from like a lifespan of like 25 years old or 30 years old all the way up to now, we're in our 70s and 80s, which is remarkable. I mean, think about that change, and that is a true evolution of humankind. That's unbelievable. And to think that now, is it going to start reversing, and not reversing just because we're not pushing medicine further? Of course, we're pushing medicine further, but the preventative care that we as individuals have to take that upon ourselves. So will maybe certain individuals continue to progress forward and continue to evolve, and some people will start to devolve. That would be a really scary reality. And think about the sociology of that situation. Think about the psychology of that situation. Do you start seeing like segregation because of things like that? And I'm thinking like way ahead in time, of course, but just by human nature, we seem to always drive towards us versus them, and that's a really unfortunate reality in our lifetime. Or not just our lifetime, but just through generations throughout the entire human history. And we've gotten better and better at kind of pushing that out of the way. But still, even so, you still have to consider that. You still have to consider that there might be a group of individuals that are extremely fit or just really health conscious and want to focus on bettering themselves, and their body's constantly being bombarded with these positive signals. And of course they find somebody else who's the same way because they're attracted to those traits. And if that's due to genetics, if that's just due to environmental factors, if that's just due to how you're raised, and then you have another portion of the population which apparently seems to be rising, that those individuals, they have a tendency, I'm certainly not going to generalize to everyone, but they have a tendency where they don't necessarily care if, well, of course I think most people care, but they don't have that knack to reduce their weight or to maintain their weight, but see an incremental rise in their body weight. So if you do start having groups like that, are you going to start seeing segregation of based on just evolutionary traits as individuals go through that kind of selective process that Darwin spoke about? I don't know. I'm really spitballing here because it's a really intriguing philosophical / biological / sociological / psychological question. And I'd genuinely be curious to hear your perspective on this. As people, and again, I'm just pinpointing one thing about, being overweight. Not necessarily if you're overweight, does that mean that you're unhealthy? The trend is certainly towards that. If you're normal weight, you're going to be typically healthier than a person who's overweight. And once you get to a certain level of obesity, there's nothing, you are less healthy than the average individual. There's no debate about that. So it's just an interesting question. I thought I'd pass it on to you guys and see if you've got something to say. If you'd like to contact me on Instagram, email, Facebook, or YouTube, I would really be genuinely curious as to what you think. Do you think that we're going to see the entire human population start to devolve, or are we going to continue to evolve? Are we going to adapt? Are we going to see that as a problem, or see some of these things as genuine issues, and maybe our body will adapt to it and become even better, even though it's in a negative situation currently? I don't know. I genuinely do not know the answer. So the question is completely open to you guys. All right. With that said, I genuinely hope I hear from you, because I would like to hear your perspective. And with that said, I hope I have the pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one. See ya.